Welcome, everyone, to MS Office Hours. It's Thursday, October 23rd. Let me please introduce your hosts.
Hello, everybody. My name is Heather Cox.
I'm Dwayne Hyatt.
And we are so lucky. I'm going to say it on recording. Thank you, Bill, for stepping in so last minute. We truly appreciate our Microsoft friends who are willing to do us a solid on short notice. So Bill's going to talk to us today about some IT admin updates. And Bill, we're going to leave you alone and let you just run the show here.
Excellent. Thank you, Heather, and thank you to Dwayne, and thanks everybody for having me. Let me pull up the presentation real quick and we'll dive right in. As soon as everyone can see it, if you can just throw some thumbs up in there, I know we're ready to go. Oh, everybody's got it. Excellent. Okay, so I presented here a few times before, but for anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Bill Sluss. I work on the Microsoft education team. I focus on sort of all things IT admin and platform related, anything tied to identity, security, compliance, privacy. Over the last year, I spent a lot of time focused on like AI and child safety and stuff in that realm. But yeah, really anything tied to the IT admin scenarios. Today, we are going to cover a few different things. So I'm going to give a quick update on School Data Sync, just to talk about one new thing that's out, and then that'll lead us into actually talking about Model Context Protocol. So if you've never heard of that, I'll try to explain what it is. I don't have any direct product announcements, but there will be some coming soon, and so I can set kind of a primer there. And then the meat of the presentation is probably in the last two parts where we'll talk about Copilot enablement, specifically for EDU tenants and what it means to turn on Copilot in an edu tenant. And also dive into some of the more advanced data security and data compliance controls. So with that, let's start with SDS. So not going to spend a whole ton of time here, but quick recap. School Data Sync, it's a free app and service that exists in every M365 tenant, and its goal is to integrate with and connect to external student information systems. So every EDU org and institution usually has one of these things. And so if you're lucky enough to have one that's one roster enabled, we can make an automated connection and start pulling data in that way. You can also bring that same data in if you're not one roster enabled through CSV file, but we pull in rostering data. So anything tied to the school, the students, the teachers, the classes, all of the memberships associated with all of those things and some underlying metadata. And the point of bringing all of that data in through SDS is to do interesting things with it. So we create users, we create groups and teams if you're provisioning out virtual classrooms. We can create parent contacts. So if you're in a K-12 environment and you're using something like the email digest for assignments, that can work. There's also an underlying API. So if you have app integration scenarios that need those parent contact details on a per student basis, that can be useful. We also create security groups and administrative units. We keep those memberships updated over time as they change in the SIS. So as we bring more data in, we continuously update. So it's sort of like a dynamic groups engine almost, with a source system being your student information system. The two things that I'll call out that aren't new features, but they almost add new value to and reason to deploy SDS that I think is worth noting that we haven't talked a lot about in the past in marketing campaigns and stuff like that, are first, the value of the user metadata and group metadata that you can bring in. And in the era of AI, it's increasingly important to give your models, your agents, your agentic apps, everything that you're running, broader access to data. So it can make informed and contextual experiences that are based on the metadata that it's operating and rationalizing over. We'll talk a lot about that in the Model Context Protocol section. But just know that bringing that data in historically, it's been useful in some capacities as an IT administrator. You can use it for PowerShell scripting and stuff like that, but it didn't have a ton of use cases up until this point. But as we enter into the era of AI, bringing in that underlying EDU metadata is going to become more and more important. The only other thing I think worth calling out here is that if you look at the configurations that we offer through Purview, there's a growing set of scenarios that leverage administrative units as the underlying scoping mechanism to define policy for data security and data compliance. And so if you're thinking about enabling Copilot or enabling AI apps within your M365 tenant, you want to grant access into your intra-tenant data store, so your SharePoints and OneDrives and whatnot. And you want to definitely think about configuring Purview, because that's going to lock down and ensure that your data state is secure, it's compliant, and then you're ready to enable that AI, and you don't risk data overexposure and data exfiltration in some cases. And so provisioning the foundational underlying administrative units can be incredibly helpful as sort of a pre-step to moving forward with your Purview deployment. And so just sort of a new spin on the value of SDS. It's not a new feature or capability, but just something to think about beyond what a lot of people think of as just sort of a provisioning engine for class teams, as an example. Okay. With that, we did add one new feature into School Data Sync recently, and this is the age group management. And so this has actually been a feature in SDS for quite some time, but we sort of tweaked it just in the last couple months. And so the one thing that you can do now in SDS is if you have multiple outbound provisioning flows, like you can configure one for, say, the elementary schools in your K-12 organization. You configure another one to provision out all of the users and groups and metadata attributes for your middle schools and one for your high schools and so on. If you're in higher ed, we also extended the metadata. So you can do your organizational structure as well now in School Data Sync, even if you're a higher ed institution and you carve up by departments or individual colleges or universities within the broader school system. So what we do here with the age group is that we allow on a per outbound provisioning basis, you can define what the age group is for the respective students within that provisioning flow. So if you have, say, one provisioning flow for elementary school, you have the ability to very quickly and easily just select minor and set all of those kids in elementary school as the minor in your directory. And that way you don't have to run any complex PowerShell or anything like that to do it later. Same thing for not adult or our teen setting. If you have a provisioning flow configured just for your high schools, you can very quickly and easily set that to the not adult, and then it'll fire that off, and then all of the user attributes will set. I'm going to go into a lot more detail about age group in a second, not within the context of SDS, but what it is, why it's important for Copilot. But just know it's a user attribute on the user, and it is necessary to gate access to Copilot today in EDU tenants specifically. So before I jump to talking about sort of age group and tenant ID, I first want to stop and talk about model context protocol. So again, I don't have a specific product update or announcement to make today, but I would definitely encourage everyone here to check out the Ignite sessions that are coming up. There's almost certainly going to be some really great announcements that we make there around model context protocol. And so if you don't know what it is, it's a protocol that helps large language models, small language models, agentic apps, any sort of AI integrate with data in a much more seamless way. It provides very contextual information back to the model, so the model can rationalize over what you're trying to access. And so what does that mean? So basically, like, imagine you have multiple platforms or systems running concurrently, and you want to create an agent that integrates with all of these different systems and platforms. And so that model needs access to everything. And in the past, you would basically have to hard code in all of the respective APIs one by one and tell the model what each of them are. And so with MCP or an MCP server, you can build a single point of entry for all of your AI to overlay an entire system or platform for all of the APIs that are there. So basically, if let's say we created an MCP server for our LMS as an example, right? If I have an MCP server that overlays all of the APIs in an LMS, there's a single point where I can point my agent at to get access to all of the data contained within that LMS. Same thing with M365, same thing with Google, same thing with others. And so this is an area right now where across Microsoft, we're looking very closely and a lot of investments around model context protocol. I can't be more specific than that, unfortunately, but these investments will ultimately drive both end user experience, making agentic apps and capabilities for the apps that we ship for EDU way more contextual and intuitive to be able to engage with and connect to resources in the tenant. But it will also make a huge difference for IT administrators. I think it stands to reason that it's going to be one of the most innovative changes that really shapes the way IT administrators do their job on a daily basis, right? We've already seen that to an extent with things like Security Copilot, for example, to easily, quickly interact with all of the vast volumes of data that you need to rationalize over as a security admin. But more broadly, for everything that we do in M365, I think it's really going to change the way we do day-to-day operations and administration. Think of all the things that you would run PowerShell against today. A lot of those things are going to be very replaceable once we have MCP integration, and you can just use natural language to ask for what you want to happen, and then it just happens, given that contextual MCP integration. So long way of saying I can't give more specifics. I really wish I could, but check out Ignite. There's going to be a bunch of stuff on this. Some really, really cool innovation, and it's just going to be a game changer for IT admins everywhere, especially for EDU. I know one of the most common challenges that we face is that a lot of organizations are budget constrained. They don't have tech proficiency that in the way that you see in a lot of enterprises, right? They can't spend massive amounts of money on these huge product teams or engineering teams. And so MCP really moves the needle for us, I think, in a big way. So definitely keep an eye on that. All right, let's pivot now to the tenant ID and age group. So we announced back in August, it was one of the biggest announcements now, we expanded Copilot chat availability to students 13 and over. Previously, that was 18 and up. We are now supporting 13 and over. And so the question is naturally, how do I turn it on or turn it off in some cases? In the latter, you don't have to worry about it. It's off by default. And so if you're worried about it just showing up, it's not going to happen because you have to do extra stuff to turn it on, unlike some other platforms. And so for us, there are two things that you need to be aware of beyond like just making sure that you have network access and you have some M365 license that entitles you to log in. The two things that you need to be aware of to gate Copilot chat access for students is specifically the tenant ID and the age group. So the tenant ID is just a tenant level setting. There's two, so you're going to either define it as a K-12 tenant or you're going to define it as a higher education tenant. And I'll show you exactly where that is and what it looks like and how to turn it on today. And then the second setting is age group. I already talked about it for SDS, but the age group is just a user value. You can define every student in your tenant as either a minor, which is typically a 13 and under, but it varies depending on what country you're in, what the age of consent is. And so that can vary, but typically it's under 13. Not adult is our teen setting, and that's going to be the 13 plus, which should now have access to Copilot. And then, of course, adult, if you have any adults that are students in your tenant, you want them to be able to access Copilot as well, Copilot Chat or M365 Copilot. What you need to know is that once you set that tenant ID, it's going to be one of those two values, right? You define it as K-12 or higher ed. If you define it as higher education, there will then be an inferred assumption where we assume all students in your tenant are adults. Because you said you're a higher education tenant, we're just going to assume every student in there is an adult. And so you don't actually have to go through the extra step of defining the age group on every single one of the students in the tenant. They will have access to Copilot Chat. Okay? However, if you're a K-12 organization or school or district, Ministry of Ed, whatever it might be, the assumption is exactly the opposite. We assume that all students in a K-12 tenant are going to be minors. And so that assumption is out of the box. It's going to block every single student from using Copilot Chat unless or until you set that corresponding age group value. Okay? The two values that you can set to grant students in a K-12 tenant access are not adult for your teen users and then adult for any adult users that you have. So if you set it to one of those two values, you're good to go. They're going to get access to Copilot Chat, assuming it's enabled in the tenant and all that. But those are the two prerequisites. So if you're thinking about rolling it out, these are the two things that you need to know. And I'm going to tell you about the features to actually make it happen. So the first is the tenant ID. We announced this a few weeks ago, and then we actually had to hide the UI because there was a little hiccup with it. But it's available now. It's available for everyone. So if you go into the M365 Admin Center, go to the Settings tab on the left-hand pane, go down to Org Settings, Services, and then you'll find the entry for Microsoft Education Tenant Identifier. Once you get there, it's really simple as it can be. Just 2 simple radio buttons. You select K-12 or higher ed. That's it. Okay, that one and done. You've now set your tenant identifier based on your organization type. Once you have that set, you need to think about age group. Okay, and in particular for the K-12. So if you're a K-12 organization, you got to think about age group if you want to start rolling out Copilot Chat. We would encourage this regardless of the Copilot Chat configuration, because we're going to build other experiences and configurations that operate off of this age group value. But definitely, if you're thinking about Copilot, you need this this age group attribute. There are 3 ways to set it today. So you can go into the Enablement Center if you want to set it on an individual user. It's right there on the user properties. It's called Parent Control, or I think it's Parent Controls, is under the property bag in the Enablement Center. But that doesn't scale, right? If you need to do a one-off change, certainly go there and adjust it. If you're already using SDS or you're thinking about using SDS, it's a great way to do it because you're already synchronizing users, and it's just a single radio button to set it for all users within a single outbound flow. You can also use PowerShell or Graph API. It's available right at the main user's endpoint. So if you look at the primary user's endpoint on Graph and the primary PowerShell commandlet for users on Graph, you'll see it just as an attribute. It's called age group there. You can mess with that all you want and use the command line interface to your liking. Now, while all of that is great, we've decided to add a 4th method of configuring age group that we think is probably the simplest of all of them, and it's what we're going to recommend going forward for everyone. This feature has not been announced yet. It'll be out within the next 2 weeks. It's going to land in exactly the same place as the tenant identifier. So that same path that I just talked about, it's going to land on the same little flyout there once you click on it. And in fact, I think we're consolidating the name. Instead of being Microsoft Education Tenant Identifier, I think we're just shortening it to Microsoft Education, and all of our org settings are going to fall under a single consolidated flyout. So be looking for that change, but it's the same path location. And to set this up, it's really as easy as you can possibly get to define age group. So we're going to support a simple one-time point-in-time CSV upload. It's not like SDS where you've got to continuously send in data or send in a bunch of CSVs or complex CSV data sets. 2 columns. So 1 column being user principal name and 1 column being age group. And if you look really closely at this slide, you'll notice that user principal name is spelled a little bit weird. It's spelled user space principal space name. Unfortunately, that is the way that the column header needs to be formatted, and that aligns with the user report that already exists in the M365 Admin Center, even though we all know the user principal name is a single consolidated string and should not have those spaces in it. But that's the format of the CSV, just for awareness. And you can upload it one time, many times, however often you want, and you just provide a list of UPNs and then the corresponding age group value that you want to set. In the UI, you click the upload users button, you select your CSV, and that's it. It's just going to chug along and process those all in the background. At the very end, once it's complete, you can click the download users button, and it's just going to give you a report back. And you can come through and make sure that all of the users got set correctly. But it's really easy. You can run it as many times as you need. Single centralized place in the Mac where you can go and just enable age group. So again, this will be available in about 2 weeks' time. Be looking for that. Next, I want to pivot. So we're already talking about Copilot enablement. I think it is good to level set on what it means for default safety, security for Copilot. As you're thinking about rolling out AI in your organization, a lot of customers that I've talked to along the way, they're at various stages of thinking about it, and they're developing very complex rules and policy. And but they haven't quite pulled the trigger on it. It's moving forward, but it's moving slow, right? There's a lot to consider when rolling out AI to students. However, you should also consider the fact that the majority of students and educators that are out there, even if the organization hasn't put one forward, they're already using AI in a lot of capacities, and using one that is safe, secure, and compliant actually has tremendous value. And so while historically you might have thought about slow rolling a policy and getting to that point, sometimes it's more beneficial to actually push ahead for the AI that you know is safe and secure. And so in talking about what makes Copilot safe and secure, we have something called enterprise data security. First and foremost, everything that we do in Copilot is secure and encrypted. It stays within the boundary of your M365 tenant the same way that all of your app data would, and that sits in SharePoint and OneDrive and so on. You have that trust boundary, your tenant compliancy trust boundary. The other thing that early on I took for granted, certainly, but it showed up in our research, a lot of EDU institutions are concerned about PII making its way into AI, and for good reason. It's an absolutely valid concern. And if you look at an overwhelming majority of consumer models out there, almost all of them, I won't say all of them, some of them take protections, but if you're uploading personally identifiable information about the student population or anything that's potentially sensitive, any and all of that could end up in training those underlying foundation models at a later point in time and have it show up for others. So there is inherent risk with just allowing your end user population to go and use whatever AI they see fit. As an organization, the responsible thing is to actually provide a safe, private, and compliant AI for them to use. And so Copilot keeps all of your data safe. We never use any of that data to train foundation models. It's a huge improvement and selling point for Copilot, no doubt. Also, all of the underlying compliancy configurations that you have in Purview port over, so all of your data protection that you set up for just core using SharePoint, OneDrive, and the underlying intra-tenant data stores also rings true when you roll out Copilot. It doesn't grant any new data access. However, if you haven't rolled out any of those protections, it does make it easier for users to find bits of information that otherwise they might not even realize they have access to. And so the need for data protection and strong data protection within the tenant ramps up significantly when you roll out AI, but all of your policies port forward. The other thing to note is that we do have built-in default content safety. So there's a lot of documentation on this. I spend a lot of time in this realm in particular. The 4 default categories that we support today are adult and sexual content, violence, self-harm, hate, and fairness. Of course, all of these are top of mind for EDU institutions. We also provide jailbreak detection in a number of ways to make sure that as end users try to engage with the AI, that they can't work around those guardrails, which is super important as well. This is an ever-evolving space as the threats and types of harms that people are concerned about evolve. Certainly the things that we will do as a company in this realm of content safety will also evolve along with that. But just know out of the box, this is what you can expect and do get with Copilot Chat and Copilot. And this also then ports the same content safety, then ports to all of our AI experiences because they're all using the same underlying Copilot model and content safety stack behind the scenes. And so just be aware that that is there. It matters a lot in the context of EDU. With that, beyond just configuring the access, so assuming you have access under control, you've set tenant ID, you've set age group, you're ready to move forward. What are the most pertinent settings that you need to think about before you actually turn it on, or at least share with users that they have access? This is not an exhaustive list, but I tried to pull out and highlight some of the ones that I think are probably going to be the most important to EDU, and that we see other competing platforms focus on as well. So first, if you don't want Copilot Chat, you can certainly go and turn that off, leverage the integrated apps option, and you can just shut down access to Copilot Chat. One of the biggest blocking features that EDUs often talk about, and in some cases, certain AIs block this by default, but that is image generation. So if you want to turn off image generation, if you're enabling Copilot for say, a teen audience and you're concerned about generating images and that sort of thing, you can go and disable that. All of this is in the Copilot control system straight there in the Mac. There's a few settings that take you out of the experience, but most of them have at least a deep link in Copilot control system to get you to where you need to be to actually turn that off. You can block and disable web search. So if you're enabling M365 Copilot, for example, and you only want to use the intelligence that's baked into the model in addition to your internal data, you don't want live web searching, you can turn that off. One that's really important, self-service purchase. So if you don't want teachers, educators, faculty, staff out there self-service purchasing Copilot licenses for themselves. You want to control that as an organization. Make sure you disable self-service purchasing. And then the other one, which I would discourage because I think it adds a ton of value, but if you're concerned for data retention purposes, you can disable personalization. So this is the memory feature configuration. So if you don't want Copilot to learn and grow and become a personalized AI for your end users, you can disable that. On the consumer side, I think that's more common. Because we're talking about data within the M365 tenant, it's probably not as big of a deal, but certainly evaluate that for your organization and for yourself. And then beyond just blocking features outright, there's a lot of knobs and switches to sort of customize the experience and manage where Copilot shows up. So you can disable it in Teams and meetings. If you have Edge rolled out in your organization, you can disable it there. And of course, in the Office apps, if you don't want it to appear. So you can tailor the experience where it doesn't actually block Copilot access. It just changes where you need to access Copilot. Finally, once you have the core configuration of Copilot enabled, you have access. Don't forget about configuring agents and connectors. So these open up new opportunities for your end user population to engage with data and use Copilot in new and interesting ways, but it might be something that you don't want in your organization. So you can block agents, block agent creation. You can disable the ability for connectors to be plugged in for external data sources. Don't overlook the configurations around agents and connectors. Super critical for your rollout strategy. Highly recommend. So with that, let's pivot. I think we have just a few minutes left. Once you have your baseline configuration for Copilot, you got your age groups, you got all that stuff that I talked about. The next thing you definitely want to think about in your strategy overall is your advanced data security and data compliance controls. Now, for us, that means looking at Microsoft Purview. There are a ton of capabilities. I heard some conversation earlier in the first 30 minutes about Purview, not in this realm exactly, but there are a ton of great data security and data compliance data governance configurations within Purview. And we haven't done a terrific job, I think, as a company for EDU specifically talking about the value of Purview. But in the era of AI, there's just no getting around it. It is becoming increasingly important for nearly every organization running M365 to look at Purview and how to lock down their data in a way to make sure that things aren't being overexposed that shouldn't, and also to make sure that AI has access to the things that it should. And so, again, a ton of great features. I'm going to highlight just a few really quickly here. So the first one that I want to talk about is communication compliance. This is a feature, it's been there for a while, but what's great about it is that it can detect any sensitive content within the context of Copilot. So in particular, if you're a K-12 organization and you're thinking about rolling out Copilot, but you want to be able to monitor the types of engagements that students have within Copilot directly, and you want to look for things like harmful content or other specific classifiers, maybe you have a keyword list that you can drop in there, you can configure and enable communication compliance that provides some level of oversight and alerting back to the school, back to the administrators, and then you can take action on it after the fact. Now, while communication compliance today isn't inherently actionable, it's more intelligence, awareness. You can identify what's happening within those engagements. You would have to manually then go and connect with those end users and say, hey, why did you do this or say this? And explain that it violates policy, which is useful, but only to an extent. There's also something now on the roadmap around DLP for Copilot, where it basically extends that same level of protection into a blocking scenario. And so I don't think it's going to be marketed as a content safety, child safety feature, but ultimately it will end up being that, I think, for a lot of EDU customers. So check that out on the roadmap. I think it's targeted for early 2026. So it's going to be a little while before we get there, but that's something to keep plugged into. The starting point, though, is communication compliance. The next thing that I think is super interesting for EDU institutions, in particular, because you have to worry about not only rolling out your own AI and whether it's Copilot or something on Azure AI, but you want to also be cognizant of what your end user population is using in the consumer space. And so data security posture management allows you to get insight into what consumer AIs are actually being used and consumed within your organization. and maybe you can leverage that data to inform various restrictions. So maybe it's web content filtering. Maybe you don't want to push that third-party AI consumer app down to devices or block it at the device level. Or maybe at the network security layer, you want to restrict access to some of those consumer apps. The reason that becomes critical is because, especially in organizations where you're not providing an AI, a safe and secure and compliant AI for them to use, they're going to use one of the other ones. And if and when they do, so often the end user population, teachers, faculty, staff, students, they're not going to be trained and know that they shouldn't be uploading all of their personal data into these consumer AIs. And so there is inherent risk. A lot of your organizational data could leak in that manner, and you want to protect it, and you want to protect that user population. So DSPM is a great way to get started, just to get some insight around what is actually being used in your organization. The last one that I'll touch on is endpoint DLP and browser DLP. And so this takes it a step further, where if you have content in your organization that's deemed sensitive through sensitive information types, trainable classifiers, and anything that's tagged, you can then block at the endpoint or at the browser level, depending on which configuration you use, and prevent copying and pasting of that content or file information up into a third-party AI. So those are the big ones around Copilot. There's plenty of other innovation. Highly encourage everyone to check out the roadmap and see all of the great innovation that's coming out. The last thing I'll leave you with that I think is super important. I already touched on Ignite. Definitely go check out Ignite. There's going to be so many announcements in this space and many others. If you haven't registered, definitely go register for Ignite. A ton of great announcements are going to be there. But the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, for anybody that's focused on cybersecurity today, which everyone should be focused on cybersecurity today, check out the new Digital Defense Report for 2025. It just recently dropped. The one last year, 2024, was incredible. If you want to gain really deep insights into the state of cybersecurity today, where the threats are coming from, all of this is backed and generated off of Microsoft Threat Intelligence. I think we're up to over 100 trillion signals daily, something wild like that. It is the greatest wealth of knowledge in terms of cybersecurity and threat landscape that organizations are facing today. Go and check out that MDDR report. So with that, definitely appreciate everybody's time. Thank you so much for having me, and I'll pause.
Amazing. Again, thank you, Bill, for coming in last minute to share all of this great information. I got to say, the first thing I thought of is, how is his background so clean? Because mine is not in any way, shape, or form. So very impressed that not only you are available last minute, but you can keep a space that big as clean as you can.
That's right. Yeah.
It's pretty impressive. So thank you again, Bill. If you didn't see already, I got last week's presentation posted. I will get Bill's posted momentarily, so you have access to that as well. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us. I'm working on your Club Copilot emails, so anybody who missed out on those invites, those are coming your way soon. And and there's the kid. And we look forward to seeing you next Thursday. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
y'all.